Greetings and welcome to the Small Rural School Achievement or SRSA program grantee orientation. My name is Leslie Pointer and I am the group leader for the Rural Education Achievement Program or the REAP team here at the U.S. Department of Education. On behalf of our whole team of program officers, we are really glad that you're making the time to view this recording. We hope that it will help you as you're getting started with implementing your local educational agency's SRSA grant. We've structured the recording to provide an orientation to the program, essentially to highlight the main things that an administrator should know about the program in order to make decisions about your school district's SRSA grant. I would like to make sure you're aware that if you're following along with the PDF version of the presentation, you can find additional resource links in the presenter's notes. Any slide that has an orange word bubble in the upper left-hand corner has a corresponding note to check out for additional resources, such as links to our website. Before we turn to the agenda for today's presentation, our team would first like to congratulate you for successfully applying for and receiving an SRSA grant. For some of you, we know this might be your first experience with the SRSA grant, and others of you may have experience in implementing the program as it's been in existence for over 20 years. We know that many of our rural school leaders take on multiple roles in their districts, and so we hope that this presentation will be an efficient way of providing you the information that you will need. There is one point of clarification regarding REAP that I'd like to start off by highlighting. REAP is comprised of two different programs. One is the Small Rural School Achievement, or the SRSA program, which is the topic of this recording. And the other is the Rural Low Income School Program, or RLIS. Both SRSA and RLIS are designed to help rural districts that might lack the personnel and resources to compete effectively for federal competitive grants, and that often receive grant allocations in amounts that are too small to be effective in meeting their intended purposes. A distinction is that SRSA grant awards are made directly from the U.S. Department of Education to school districts, which we refer to as local educational agencies, or LEAs. Each year, our team also makes RLIS awards to state educational agencies, or SEAs, which then make RLIS awards to eligible LEAs within their states. All of that is to say that in the past, your LEA may have participated in the SRSA program by receiving a grant directly from us, or in the RLIS program by working directly with your SEA. Today's presentation is not going to go over the details related to the RLIS program, nor are we going to delve deeply into the SRSA application process. If you have questions about RLIS, we encourage you to reach out to your contacts at the state level. And if you're looking for information related to the SRSA application, you can find relevant presentations on our REAP resources page of the REAP website, which we will share at the end of today's presentation. Our goal today is that you're going to leave this presentation understanding the SRSA program, how to access grant funds, and how to obtain support throughout the grant cycle. The agenda that we're going to follow during the recording will cover 5 areas. These include, first, an SRSA program overview, use of SRSA funds and flexibilities, how to access your award funds, information related to our data collection process, and then finally, available resources and how to make use of them. If after viewing the recording you still have questions about the program, our team is always available to support. You can reach us at any time at reap@ed.gov, which you will hear a number of times throughout the presentation. But we do hope that by viewing this will be time well spent for you, and it will answer many of your questions. I'm going to pass the presentation next over to Justin to kick us off with SRSA program basics. Thanks, Justin.
Thank you, Leslie, for that introduction. Now, the first part of our presentation today is an overview of the SRSA grant program, and much of this will be familiar to those of you who have worked with SRSA in the past, but we realize that the SRSA program can appear to be a bit complex to a new grantee. So over the next few slides, I will be introducing some of the most fundamental pieces of information related to the program. So let's start off with this slide, just sort of reviewing the purpose of the SRSA program. The Small Rural School Achievement Program is designed to help rural LEAs use federal resources more effectively in order to address their unique needs. The formula grant funds and the flexibilities available under REAP enable those rural LEAs to participate more fully and effectively in many of the ESCA programs and allow them to provide educational services to their students. So on this slide, we are reviewing the eligibility requirements for the Small Rural School Achievement Grant. And as the name implies, an LEA, or a local educational agency, also known as a school district, must be both small and rural to receive an SRSA grant. An LEA is small if its ADA is under 600 or if it is located in a county with a population density of less than 10 persons per square mile. An LEA is rural if all of the component schools are assigned a rural locale code by NCES, which is 41, 42, or 43 for SRSA. Another way to become rural is if the state has informed the Department of Education that the LEA is considered to be rural for the purposes of the SRSA program. Later in the presentation, we are going to be talking a bit more about where that data comes from and how we make these eligibility determinations. So stay tuned for that later on. On the next slide, we're looking at the SRSA grant timeline, and this is a breakdown of the grant making year for the REAP program, which consists of 4 phases. The timeline is designed to be read left to right. It starts in October, which is also the beginning of the federal fiscal year. The beginning of our grant making process begins in October and runs until January. During this period, this period is called the eligibility determination phase. And during this time, the REAP team works with SEAs and our National Center for Educational Statistics to collect LEA eligibility data. That's going to be covered again later on in the presentation. We have a whole section on data. And once we finish collecting the necessary data in January, we publish our master eligibility spreadsheet, which you will see called the MES. If our initial data collection shows that your LEA is REAP eligible, you will get the chance to review the MES and make any corrections to the data for your LEA. You should also carefully review the primary and secondary contacts listed in the MES and report any updates to us by emailing reap@ed.gov. That's REAP@ed.gov. We will send application links to the primary contact listed on the MES. So it is very important to get us any changes before the SRSA application period opens up in February. Also in January, LEAs should check the performance period of the SRSA awards that they have received and that are still active. LEAs should liquidate any remaining SRSA funds in G6 before the January 30th deadline. We've also included a reminder on this slide. You can see that down at the bottom. And this reminder is to make sure that you are kind of regularly ensuring that your UEI remains active in SAM.gov. Your UEI registration in SAM needs to be renewed on an annual basis. And so, as we'll cover later, if your UEI expires, it can cause delays with your funding in G6. We have a whole section on that later in the video. And so you'll get more information on UEIs and updating that in a few minutes. Following the eligibility determination process is the SRSA application period, which typically begins in February. This is where the contact information we have on file for each of you is critical, because as I mentioned earlier, the person the individualized SRSA application invitation gets mailed to the primary contact that's listed on our MES. Then the REAP team uses the information provided in the SRSA application to finalize the SRSA and RLIS cohorts, and that happens in May through June. Finally, we start making the grant awards on July 1, and that can extend into August. So that's our general timeline. We hope that's helpful. And as we're going through the performance periods, we just want to make sure that you are really accessing and working with your grant funds at the correct time. So here is performance periods. And this slide features a chart that lays out the performance period for 3 years worth of grants. So this is just sort of a sample 3 years. Although an LEA's SRSA eligibility can change from year to year, many LEAs do receive an SRSA grant every year, and it's essential to understand that each SRSA grant has a specific performance period during which grantees must obligate and then liquidate their awarded funds. The reference to fiscal year is important. When we use the term fiscal year here on the REAP team, what we're referring to is the federal fiscal year. The federal fiscal year corresponds with the first school year in which the funds are available. So for example, FY22 award funds are available beginning in July 2022, which happens to correspond with the 22-23 school year. So sometimes I know that can confuse people, federal fiscal year versus academic year. When dealing with REAP, we're almost always talking about federal fiscal years. The chart on this slide shows that each SRSA grant is now available to obligate for a period of 27 months from the time the grant is awarded, and the liquidation deadline is 120 days after the obligation deadline. That September 30th deadline is important to note because it means that no new obligations or no new charges can be made against the award once that timing is hit, okay? So in terms of definitions, obligate means to enter a binding commitment to spend funds. Districts need to have the spending decisions for their award funds in place by that obligation deadline. So that's a September 30th. One of your grants every year is hitting their obligation deadline. Please note that you do not need to report or submit anything to REAP or put anything into G6 in order to obligate funds, but your internal records should transparently reflect when and for what purpose you made the obligation. The other big term here is liquidate, and that means to fully draw down the funds in G6. After the liquidation deadline, you will no longer have access to that award in G6, and so if there's any remaining balance after that January 30th, then that money is very difficult to get to. So reporting documents. This slide covers some of the most common questions that we get related to documentation and reporting requirements. First, it is not a requirement for an LEA to submit documentation to the REAP team in order to draw down SRSA funds from G6. We're going to go into G6 in greater detail later in the reporting, but the only thing necessary for accessing SRSA grant funds in G6 is a G6 account with payee access. Just having a G6 account is not enough. It also does have to have payee access, but you don't need to include any documents when making a transaction in G6. While not required to submit documentation to access funds, an LEA is required to maintain internal records related to SRSA for 3 years from the date of the final expenditure. You will see that noted on the bottom of this chart on the screen here, and that's with that green check mark. Internal records include financial records, supporting documents, statistical records, and all other non-federal entity records pertinent to SRSA. So as you're preparing to use your SRSA funds, please remember that you do not need to submit your invoices or receipts to REAP. Just hang on to those for your own records. The REAP team will occasionally conduct monitoring of LEAs receiving Title V funds to review an LEA's grant administration and fiscal management process with the goal of ensuring that the implementation of the SRSA program is consistent with the fiscal, administrative, and selective program requirements. For that reason, it is important that you maintain those internal records as we may review them as part of that monitoring process. REAP often receives requests from LEAs related to the intended use of funds captured in their initial SRSA application. Sometimes these are requests to alter that initial use of funds, or sometimes it's a new superintendent trying to figure out what that previous administrator earmarked the SRSA grant fund for. Please be aware that that exercise is not necessary. Your LEA is not bound by the particular fund use which you described in your SRSA application, and you are welcome to use your SRSA funds to pay for allowable activities. We're going to go into greater detail into what are allowable activities and how you can use your SRSA funds, so stay tuned for the next section. We just wanted to highlight here that for reporting purposes, linking that up with the application is not necessary. Finally, we are often asked if there are any final reports necessary once an LEA has finished expending their funds. The SRSA program does not have a final grant report. So with that, that concludes our program overview. And in the next section, Eric is going to talk to you about using your SRSA grant funds. So I pass it over to you, Eric.
Hi, I'm Eric Schultz, a program officer here on the REAP team. In this presentation, we're going to talk you through how to use the SRSA funds that you've been awarded. We're going to include a review of the requirements and the flexibilities that are available to you as a grantee under the SRSA grant program. To begin, it's helpful to remember that the REAP program, including your SRSA award, is authorized under Title V, Part B of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. As with many federal funds, the use of your SRSA award is governed by the Uniform Administrative Requirements, cost principles, and audit requirements. Most notably, these include requirements that the costs that you choose to cover with your SRSA grant funds be reasonable, necessary, allowable, and allocable. SRSA grant funds also have important supplement, not supplant requirements that we will review in a moment. As discussed previously in the SRSA reporting requirements presentations, the intended use of funds that you indicated on your SRSA application is not a binding commitment. You are free to use your awarded SRSA grant funds for any allowable activity under the School Improvement Title programs, and you're free to change that use of funds at any point during the 27-month grant performance period. We know that this flexibility is a crucial factor in helping you meet your LEA's needs. Please remember that it's your responsibility as the grantee to ensure that each use of funds you select is allowable and that it also meets the supplement and not supplant requirements. As you can see on this slide, we've included several important questions that you'll want to consider as you use your SRSA grant funds. Pay special attention to the questions, is this allowable? And is this supplanting? These are especially important SRSA considerations that you're going to want to have in mind moving forward. On this next slide, you'll basically see the allowable uses. The SRSA grant funds can be used for any allowable activities under the following ESEA school improvement titles: Title I, Part A, Title II, Part A, Title III, Title IV, Part A, or Title IV, Part B of the ESEA. As you can see, the chart on the right outlines some proposed uses of these funds. When you're considering a use of funds for your grant award, it is your responsibility as the grantee LEA to determine which ESEA title program or programs under which your proposed expenditure would be allowed. Your REAP team program officer can help you with this determination. The chart that you see on this slide can also be found in the Uses of SRSA Funds section of the REAP informational document. Another resource that can be helpful for LEAs is the REAP Uses of Funds Guide. This guide, which is available on the REAP website and will be linked in slides for presentations, provides a list of allowable examples. Please note that this list are only examples. They're not intended to be an exhaustive or a fully complete list of all the ways that you can make use of your REAP grant funds. However, we do hope that you will use these examples as a guide and a helpful starting point as you're considering how best to make use of your SRSA grant funds. The last point we want to bring to your attention on this slide is a reminder that in terms of reporting purposes, your REAP SRSA grant funds are always linked back to Title V, regardless of which of the allowable ESEA title program activities you support with your grant funds. For example, if you use your SRSA funds to support an activity allowable under Title III, those funds don't become Title III funds. You will report them as Title V funds. On this next slide, we're going to detail the supplement, not supplant requirement. Your awarded SRSA grant funds can only be used to supplement allowable school improvement activities under the ESEA school improvement titles that we've discussed. They cannot be used to supplant any local, state, or federal funding sources. So, how do you tell if your proposed use of SRSA funds constitutes supplement? In general, when you're considering if a proposed SRSA activity is supplemental, you should determine whether it would have been funded, whether you would have funded this activity with other federal, state, or local funds if the SRSA funds were not available. If you determine that no other federal, state, or local funds are available to fund that proposed activity, then you're probably on solid ground in terms of supplementing, provided, of course, that the proposed use of funds is an allowable use of SRSA funds. Because each LEA has their own set of funding sources, it's the responsibility of the LEA, the grantee, to determine if an activity is supplementing or supplanting within that context. Again, the REAP informational document is the best resource available to help with information on this topic. On this next slide, we're going to detail 3 situations when it will be presumed that supplementing has occurred. First scenario, if the activity is one that would ordinarily be covered with other federal, state, or local funds. For example, in most cases, standard textbook purchases would ordinarily be covered with state or local funds. Second thing to consider, if the LEA had previously funded this particular activity with other federal, state, or local funds. And third, if the activity is state mandated or required by federal law. An example of this would be provision of certain services to English learners that is required under federal civil rights laws. If a proposed activity falls into one of these categories, it doesn't automatically mean that the activity is supplanting. Rather, in these cases, it would be up to the grantee LEA to demonstrate that the proposed activity is supplemental and not supplanting. To wrap up this section of today's presentation, we're also going to review the Alternative Fund Use Authority, which we call AFWA. In addition to the ability to spend your SRSA funds for allowable activities under multiple federal ESEA title programs, LEAs that are eligible for the SRSA program are granted even wider latitude in uses of federal funds under the Alternative Fund Use Authority. AFWA allows SRSA eligible LEAs greater flexibility in how they spend the funds that they receive under the Title II Part A program, as well as the Title IV Part A program. If an LEA is SRSA eligible, it has the flexibility to use any or all of those Title II Part A or Title IV Part A funds to use them just like an SRSA grant to support allowable activities under the full range of ESEA school improvement title programs that we've just spoken about, specifically Title I, Part A, Title II Part A, Title III, Title IV Part A, and Title IV Part B. This AFWA authority does not authorize a transfer of funds from one of those title programs to another. Rather, what it does is it gives more latitude, more options for a district to spend the 2A and Title IV Part A funds that it receives. This AFWA authority is available to all SRSA eligible LEAs, including those dual eligible LEAs that may choose to participate in the RLIS program instead of SRSA. The AFWA authority also extends to those eligible LEAs who, for whatever reason, do not submit an SRSA application. LEAs that wish to exercise AFWA must notify the SEA if they intend to exercise this authority. The SEAs are responsible for setting a deadline by which LEAs in that state who wish to use AFWA must notify them. If you're interested in taking advantage of this flexibility, we encourage you to contact your state partners directly to learn more about these requirements. I hope you found this section to be helpful in determining how best to make use of your awarded SRSA grant funds. Thanks for your attention, and always feel free to contact the REAP team if you have additional questions.
Thanks, Eric. My name is Stacy. I'm a program officer with the REAP team. In the next several slides, we're going to discuss the relationship between the department's G6 system and Unique Entity IDs, or UEIs, which are housed in the System for Award Management, otherwise known as SAM. We will also provide an overview of the UEI renewal process in sam.gov and review the process for accessing your SRSA grant funds in G6. Formerly called G5, G6 is the department's grants management platform. As has been alluded to throughout this presentation, fiscal year 2024 and prior year grant funds are stored in G6. For some helpful context, the upgrade from G5 to G6 started in 2023 and is not yet complete. Because of this, it is possible that you may still see references to G5 on department materials or websites. At this point in time, G5 and G6 are essentially interchangeable. And for simplicity's sake, we will be using G6 for the remainder of this presentation. Additionally, for your purposes, G5 accounts have rolled over to G6. So G5 account holders do not need to create new G6 accounts, for example. On this slide, we will look at the actual grant award notification, or GAN, each of you received this summer as a notification that you received SRSA grant funds. The GAN is the official notice from the department that your LEA's SRSA award is available in G6, the department's grants management system that we just talked about. It contains a lot of important information, including the amount of the award, the grant recipient contacts, and the conditions under which the grant is awarded. You'll notice that your SRSA award is given a PR award number. All SRSA grants, regardless of the year, begin with S358A. That's how you know it's an SRSA award. And the 2 digits following that initial code relate to the federal fiscal year of the award. So a PR award number for this year, federal fiscal year 24, will say S358A24. That indicates that it's a fiscal year 24 SRSA grant. Next, we will look at the recipient contacts. You will see that the recipient state director, showing in box 3 of the GAN, is the secondary contact we have on file for your LEA. Both the primary and secondary contacts at your LEA receive a copy of the GAN. Keep in mind that the names listed on the GAN have no special authority to draw the grant funds in G6. In order to access your grant funds, someone at your LEA must be assigned with the role of payee in G6. We're going to discuss establishing payee access a little bit later in the presentation. The only thing being named on the GAN allows you to do is access the document in G6. And that document can be downloaded and kept for internal LEA records. As a general rule, we do not make changes to the contact information in the GAN. If your primary or secondary contacts have changed since you submitted the application, you can contact us at reap@ed.gov. We will update our internal contact list so that any new communication goes to your new contact. You will also have an opportunity to update contacts each year when you apply for SRSA. So the names that you list on the SRSA grant application become the names listed on the GAN. This slide shows some other useful information contained in the GAN. Block 7 shows the award amount. Block 2 contains the PR award number, which we just discussed. Block 6 contains a 15-month award period. The terms and conditions of the SRSA grant are laid out in Block 10. There you will find an explanation of the additional 12-month period of obligation that applies to SRSA grants. This means that in total, there's 27 months in the performance period for your SRSA grant. As you see here, the GAN also includes directions for accessing funds in G6, including setting up an account and requesting payee access. There are also directions for registering your LEA's unique entity ID, UEI number, in the System for Award Management, SAM, which we're going to talk about more in a few minutes. There is a relationship between your LEA, SAM.gov, and G6. You want to access your funds you want to access your SRSA funds, which are housed in the G6 system. In other words, G6 is where you access and draw down SRSA funds. Your LEA's SRSA funds in G6 are associated with your LEA's UEI number. G6 regularly checks SAM.gov for the status of your UEI number to ensure that it has an active registration. In order to access funds in G6, your LEA must have a UEI that has an active registration in SAM.gov. We'll discuss UEIs more in a moment, but know that your LEA must maintain an active UEI registration in SAM, and this requires an annual renewal process. In this way, your LEA must ensure that the relationship between G6, UEIs, and SAM does not have any breaks, or you will be unable to access SRSA funds. Okay, let's talk about UEI numbers. UEIs, or unique entity IDs, are required for any entity doing business with the federal government. UEIs are 12-character alphanumeric IDs assigned to an entity by SAM.gov. All SRSA grantee LEAs were required to include a UEI in the fiscal year 24 SRSA application. This means that your LEA must have provided a UEI in order to complete the fiscal year 24 SRSA application. This is good news. If you are taking part in this webinar, you have already completed that part of the process. Your LEA has a UEI. Like I mentioned on the previous slide, the UEI for your LEA must have an active registration in SAM.gov in order to access SRSA funds in G6. If your LEA is impacted by an inactive UEI registration, you will be able to access the funds in G6 once your UEI registration is active. So in other words, again, if your UEI registration is inactive, you cannot access funds in G6. But once your UEI registration is active, you will be able to access those funds. Please feel free to contact us at reped.gov if you require any assistance with your UEI registration. If you do not know your LEA's UEI or if it is actively registered, you can search on SAM.gov. Specifically, the status tracker linked on this slide will show you the registration status of your UEI. As I mentioned, once your LEA has a UEI, it must then be registered in SAM.gov, and the registration must be renewed annually. That's what we mean when we say it has an active registration. That registration has been renewed, and it is currently active, which has to happen annually. This means that a UEI can be an ID assigned status, meaning that SAM.gov has assigned a UEI to your LEA, but it has not gone through the registration process. For the purposes of SRSA, grantees must go through the full registration process so that the UEI is an active registration status. Take a look at the two screenshots on the slide. These are from SAM.gov. The top screenshot with the entity data hidden in blue shows a UEI that is an ID assigned status, meaning that the UEI has not gone through the registration process. The bottom screenshot with the red lines shows a UEI that has an active registration. Notice that the active registration UEI has an expiration date, whereas the ID assigned UEI only has an assigned date. The registered UEI also has a cage code associated with the UEI, which happens when the entity goes through the UEI registration process. As I mentioned earlier, UEI registrations expire each year unless the entity administrator logs into SAM.gov and renews that registration. We recommend that you start this process early each year, since some of the process changes may cause delays. And those delays could lead to an inactive UEI registration, which could lead to you not being able to access awarded SRSA grant funds. I also mentioned an entity administrator. What is that? An entity administrator is the name of the role in SAM.gov that allows someone to register or manage registration for one or more non-federal entities, excuse me. This role is assigned to the first person who registers an entity. If your entity is already registered and you need this role, request it from someone in your organization who already has the role, or request the role directly by submitting a notarized letter. You can also use the role request feature in SAM.gov. However, this only works if your LEA has access to an entity administrator at the moment. This slide links to information on how to become the entity administrator. Now, how do you know if you are the entity administrator? If you do not see your LEA's UEI in SAM.gov workspace, you are not the entity administrator. The final screenshot on this slide at the very bottom highlights how you find this workspace, which is the name SAM.gov uses for the homepage when a user logs in. The workspace is also where you will find FSD.gov incident tickets that you submit and any notifications. More on that later. Again, if you do not see this workspace, you are likely not the entity administrator, and you should be going through the process of requesting to become the entity administrator for your LEA. If you'd like more information on the workspace, see the link. As renewing UEI registrations in SAM and applying for SRSA are annual processes, we recommend a few maintenance activities to ensure that your UEI we recommend a few maintenance activities to ensure that your UEI maintains an active registration at all times. First, your current entity administrator can invite another staff member to serve as an administrator in SAM. This creates a backup entity administrator in the event of turnover. The instructions for this process are linked on the slide. Second, keep an eye on your UEI's registration expiration date in SAM. We recommend setting a reminder 3 to 4 weeks in advance of the expiration date so that you can start the registration renewal process with plenty of time. Before talking about G6 access, let's look at some resources to support your UEI management. If you need help registering your LEA's UEI or renewing that registration, we recommend visiting REAP's UEI and SAM support website, linked on this slide. That includes step-by-step directions on registration processes, links to other resources, helpful videos, and tips and tricks. This page also includes the information on entity administrator access, entity validation, and more. We also recommend viewing the UEI registration and validation webinar for rural districts, which was hosted by GSA. This webinar walks through the details of the UEI registration process and addresses some of the common issues experienced by SRSA grantees. The link to this webinar is on the slide as well. In addition to REAP resources, SAM.gov has many articles on the help page that address common UEI issues. This slide has a screenshot showing you how to access the help section of SAM.gov's website. You can search topics such as entity administrator or registration and find articles addressing the most common issues or topics related to UEI registration, for example. Note that many of the SAM.gov help options, such as searching, will bring you to the Federal Service Desk or FSD.gov website. FSD.gov is where you can search for articles on different topics, live chat to get support, and where you submit an incident if you need help or need to submit documentation. For example, if you have issues validating your entity during the registration process, you will need to submit documentation via an incident ticket. And this happens on FSD.gov. FSD.gov uses the same login information as SAM.gov. This is a process known as login.gov and is universal across these sites. So your FSD and SAM accounts are linked. Once you submit an incident ticket, you should be able to view it in FSD or SAM.gov. You will also receive an email and can use the email to find your incident. Note that you cannot use SAM.gov to submit an incident. It has to be done through FSD.gov. But again, those two sites and those accounts are linked. We encourage grantee LEAs to refer to the REAP guide or SAM.gov help articles for support in renewing their UEI in SAM. All of these resources are hyperlinked on this slide. Okay, let's shift over to talking about G6 access. Once your LEA has an active UEI registration and SRSA funds have been awarded, you can start spending and accessing those funds in G6. In order for your LEA to access funds in G6, someone must set up an account and request payee access. This is a two-part process and distinct from the SRSA grant application and the GAN. The name listed on the GAN has no bearing on who can access SRSA funds in G6. We talked about that earlier in this presentation. The instructions for how to create an account in G6 and then request payee access are included in REAP's guide for G6 access, which is linked on the slide and in the chat. As a reminder, once funds are awarded, the name on the GAN cannot be changed, but your LEA can designate someone as payee, following the directions in the guide on accessing SRSA funds in G6. The G6 help desk is an excellent resource. You can call or email G6 for help in setting up payee access or other issues related to G6. We recommend reaching out to G6 with questions related to the G6 platform before reaching out to REAP, since they are really the experts. Once the payee is set up in G6 and you have an allowable activity for which you want to spend your grant funds, the payee contact can withdraw funds in one of two ways. Either an advance payment, this is essentially pay as you go, or on a reimbursement basis, whereby you pay your invoice first using your LEA's general purpose funds, then you go into G6 at a later date with your coded invoice and reimburse yourself. A few reminders. To draw down funds in G6, you do not need to submit any documentation. Once you have payee access, you should be able to request a payment without uploading documentation or including a justification that must be approved. Finally, every G6 drawdown request must be supported by an obligation. An obligation is a legally binding commitment to spend. Once you have made the obligation, you can request the funds in G6. That concludes this section of the presentation. I will now turn it over to Robert, who will walk you through some information related to our data collection processes.
And thanks, Stacy. This is Robert Hitchcock, Program Officer with the REAP program. And in this section, I'm going to talk about the data that REAP uses to make SRSA awards and how you can help to make sure your data is accurate. So at the basic level, the SRSA grant is what the department refers to as a formula award. This essentially means that we use data to determine an LEA's eligibility for an award and how much that award is going to be. So we utilize data from the National Center for Education Statistics and CES, the U.S. Census, and your SEA. So let's go to the next slide, please, and see what data is used to determine the eligibility. So we saw this slide earlier when looking at the factors that contribute to your eligibility to receive an SRSA grant. So when determining whether an LEA meets the small definition, we rely on ADA provided to use from your SEA and data collected by the U.S. Census and reported to us by NCES. Because these numbers inform whether your LEA receives funding or not, it's very important that you check the accuracy each year during the December to February timeframe. Next slide, please. So on this slide, we're looking at a very simplified version of the formula that's used to determine how much funding your LEA will receive. One of our most commonly asked questions is, why is our LEA's award so different this year compared to last? And this slide will help us to understand this better. The general idea is that we determine an initial award amount and then subtract the combined total of your Title IIA and Title IVA awards from the previous year to determine your total SRSA grant amount. In the box with the dotted line border, you can see that the initial amount is calculated by subtracting your ADA, your average daily attendance, by 50. We then multiply that number by 100 and then add $20,000. So a minimum initial award is $20,000 and the maximum initial award is $60,000. So because the SRSA grant is intended to complement your other title funds, we do subtract your Title IIA and IVA amounts from this initial award amount. I'll also just briefly note here that each year we do have to factor in something called the ratable adjustment before finalizing award amounts. And this ratable adjustment helps us to right-size the awards based upon the amount of money appropriated by Congress to meet the final number of LEAs in the SRSA cohort. So because of the ratable adjustment, it would not be unusual for you to do this math and not arrive at the exact final award amount you receive. So we apply this ratable adjustment towards the very end of finalizing the final cohorts. So looking in simple terms, and because of the way this formula is set up, the biggest drivers to your final award amount are going to be your average daily attendance, your ADA, and the amount you receive under Title 2A and 4A. So if your SRSA award has drastically changed from year to year, it is most likely related to fluctuations in your ADA or these title amounts. So on this slide, I just wanted to run through a quick example of calculating an award amount to demonstrate the math. So to calculate the initial amount in this example, we're going to subtract 50 from the ADA of 65, and we'll get 15. We'll then multiply that by 100 to get 1,500. 1,500 is then added to 20,000 for an initial amount of 21,500. So combined, this LEA got 16,000 between Title 2A and Title 4A for the previous year. When we subtract 16,000 from 21,500, we're left with 5,500 as the final award estimate. We would need to multiply this final amount in the ratable adjustment to get the actual final award amount. So in closing out this section, I'd just like to highlight again how important it is for you to take time each year around January to review and verify your data. So we rely on NCS and your SEA to provide us with massive amounts of data, and you know your school district best, and we can help, and you can help us check these numbers for accuracy. And with that, I'm going to pass this over to Justin. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm back again. And in this section, we will briefly review some helpful REAP resources, including the REAP informational document and what we refer to as the REAP Quick Links document. So let's start with the informational document. This informational document was created to give REAP grantees a comprehensive resource where they can learn more about the process related to the REAP, SRSA, and RLIS programs combined in one user-friendly document. It can be accessed on the REAP resources page, and that's part of our REAP website. We will also include the link here in the slides. So this is a look at the table of contents from the informational document, and we know that there's a lot of content here in the informational document. We really just want to help you today understand how to access it and know that you can find what you're looking for once you're in the document. Since the document covers REAP, it is divided into two sections that address both of our REAP programs. So there's an SRSA section and an RLIS section. As an SRSA grantee, you would probably and most likely be interested in sort of the introductory section, the part on SRSA eligibility, and there are a number of topics under that related to SRSA program, including the application requirements, the use of funds information, AFWA, which we talked about earlier. And so some of the key features included in the document will help you understand the statutes relevant to the SRSA program. It answers frequently asked questions, and it helps you kind of navigate through the document. So starting with the table of contents is a great place if you're looking at that informational document. Another resource we want to highlight here is the financial status reports that the REAP team sends out on a regular basis to our SRSA LEAs. These reports are going to come from the reap@ed.gov email address. And REAP sends these reports to the two current contacts for each of our SRSA grantees when an available balance of $100 or more is showing on our tracker. And so we do update our contacts on a regular basis. So if there's a change in staffing at your LEA, please let us know so that when we do these reports or making invitations or anything like that, that we are making sure to reach the correct people. Again, you can send those staffing changes, contact updates to reap@ed.gov. Again, that's reap@ed.gov. This slide here is a mock-up of the tables of sort of what it would look like to receive one of these financial reports. For each available award, you'll see the remaining balance. We list the PR award number, the date that the award was generated, and the upcoming obligation and liquidation deadlines. These reports will also include how much time you have left to spend the remaining funds, information on how the funds can be used, steps you need to access the funds, how to update contact information, and a link to a PDF document, which is our G6 guide, which includes a step-by-step process for gaining payee access and drawing down funds. These reports are a snapshot on a particular day of what's available in G6. And so sometimes there's a lag between the data in the report and what your current G6 standing is. You know, if you go into G6 on the same day that we draw the data, that won't be linked up. And so sometimes we're slightly behind what's in G6. So you can always receive the most up-to-date information on the balance of your award by logging into G6 and checking the balance in the system. That's the most accurate place. Please note that the REAP team does not operate G6, and we cannot generally help you with very specific or technical questions related to G6 and the payee access process. So for those of you who have those kind of questions, we encourage you to contact the G6 Help Desk for assistance. We have included that information earlier in the presentation, and will also be included in the resource materials with these financial status reports. And on this slide, we sort of have a one-stop shop, and this is going to be our last piece of content for the reporting today. But this is sort of a collection of really great resources that cover a wide gamut of topics. I'll just highlight a few of them for you. So first, you'll see that we have a link to the REAP FAQs. Those are some of the most commonly asked questions along with answers. So if you do have a question, check there. We may have already answered it. Secondly is the REAP informational document. We talked about that literally just a second ago, and it's really the authority on the REAP program, so that's a great place to look for information. I'll also highlight here the REAP resources page, and that is a collection of assistance materials that cover the whole wide range of topics. And so if you do have a question, if you're confused about something, often going to the REAP resources page, you will find a link related to that thing you're looking for. So it's a great resource to look towards. And I'm not going to go through all the resources on this slide. You'll be able to access them through the links in the supplementary documents. And so, again, there's lots of options for technical assistance. There's lots of ways that you can reach out to us for assistance. So please make use of the resources, make use of your REAP program officers. And with that, I am going to pass to Leslie to close out the end of this presentation. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you for joining today's webinar. We hope that you found the information useful to you and that you have some new resources to consider as you spend your SRSA grant. If you have any questions that were not answered by the presentation, you can always reach our team by emailing us at reap@ed.gov. That's REAP@ed.gov. We're wishing you a great school year ahead. Thanks again.